So step two, now that we know we're emitting 2 million tonnes of CO2 in Solihull, it's time to think about a reduction target. And it's really important to think about how the shape of the graph on which you're going to plot your energy descent or your CO2 descent. And I've kind of just come up with 6 here. I think this is the one we probably should be following, this idea of low-hanging fruit. There's still 43.1% of homes with a substandard loft insulation. There's still many incandescent light bulbs and many south-facing roofs without microgeneration on them. So this might be where we can make lots of progress. This is probably what is going to happen and probably what's been happening over the last 10 years. You've all been busting a gut to kind of create the political space to get governments to be more ambitious. This is where we deliver the same CO2 per year. And this is where we kind of say, I'm sure some scientist or some technologist will invent our way out of the problem in the future. Or maybe this is fusion or really, really cheap photovoltaics. And this is collapse. And this is my favorite graph, the oops, too much shopping graph, which is probably where we are at the moment in terms of this continued rise in CO2 or not falling CO2. So we have to choose a graph. And what I reckon is that to achieve a 60% reduction by 2050, we need to take about 2% per year out of the mix. To achieve an 80% reduction by 2050, we need to be taking 4% per year, year on year out the mix. And to achieve broadly carbon neutrality by 2050, we need to be aiming for 6% per year. So Solihull, if we are not unambitious, but if we sign ourselves up to the 60% reduction by 2050, which is current government policy in the United Kingdom, that means that the first year's target, 2% of the 2 million nearly tonnes of CO2, means we have to take out nearly 40,000 tonnes of CO2 from the mix. And before I go on to kind of looking at that, DEFRA have done a bunch of work around National Indicator 186, per capita reduction of CO2, giving local authorities some idea of what the potential savings might be. And this is, for Solihull, they reckon by 2010 that we can reduce CO2 emissions by 12% in Solihull with a range of measures. Now, given that since 1990 we've reduced CO2 emissions in the United Kingdom by 6.4%, something has to change over the next couple of years if we're going to deliver twice as much of that as that in roughly 9 times less. So rather than sort of 18 years, we're going to deliver double in just 2 years. So what might those actions be? This again is some DEFRA work looking at road transport. The green is domestic and the yellow is industrial and commercial. What some of those measures might be. And for those that can read, you'll recognise some of those things from working with the Carbon Trust, climate change agreements, through to CERT, through to renewable transport fuel obligation, and everything in between. But I just wanted to focus in on a few of those and think of a large wind turbine. What does that do for our almost 40,000 tonnes of CO2 target in Solihull, this first-year target? Well, each very large industrial wind turbine takes out on an annual basis about just over 2,000 tonnes. So if we were just to put up wind turbines for Solihull, we'd have to have 17 of them by December the 31st. So the first-year target just for wind is 17 wind turbines. Now, the region, the West Midlands as a whole, doesn't have a single commercial-scale wind turbine yet. And so, that looks quite challenging, doesn't it? Let's look at microgeneration. Let's look at a 6-kilowatt proven wind turbine. Saves, in a fairly decent site, around 5 tonnes of CO2 per year. We would need 7,708 of those in the next 12 months if we're to meet our 2% target just with small wind. So 1 in every 10 homes would have to have a 6-kilowatt wind turbine. If we were to do that with solar hot water heating, a sort of average domestic scale, unit saving around 1,400 kilowatt hours a year of the heating fuel, which I've assumed in this case is gas, we would need 143,000 of those, and there are only 81,000 homes in Solihull, so that clearly on its own can't meet the target. And I continue to go through. Let's look at PV. We'd need 120,000 1-kilowatt peak photovoltaic systems. Cavity wall insulation, we would need 61,000 installations of cavity wall insulation, but I reckon there's only about 15,000 unfilled cavities left in Solihull, so that's not on its own any good. Domestic lighting, we would need 216,000 homes worth of low energy lighting, for example, loft insulation. We can go on. The point I'm trying to make is that this, beyond HECA, is what you need to be doing as climate change officers, whatever your future job titles might be, in terms of looking at your local authority area and community reductions in CO2. And essentially the mix for the next 12 months in Solihull to reach this 2% target would be that we would need to banish the incandescent light bulb from every single home. We would need to top up or to fill every substandard loft in Solihull. We would need to fill every single unfilled cavity in Solihull, and we need 4 very large wind turbines. That is just 1 year's challenge to reduce CO2 emissions by just 2%. And then the following year we have to do something else. Essentially, that's the scale of what faces us. And just to kind of give you a bit of an idea how we're approaching this in Shropshire, we have a local public service agreement in Shropshire trying to take out some 4,000 tonnes of CO2 in 3 communities by the 31st of March next year. And this is progress to date in those 3 communities. Okay, great. We're only going to get halfway there, essentially. Incredibly challenging. And this just shows what we're doing. A range of case studies of the sort of stuff we're focusing on in terms of homes and businesses. So with my last 2 minutes, I'll just highlight what the recent House of Commons Communities and Local Government Committee said on this particular issue. The conclusions from that report said reducing carbon emissions by 60% over the next 42 years requires remarkable change in our habits, our fuel consumption and the technologies we use to build and run our homes. Yet even the most superficial glance back 42 years is enough to remind us that interplanetary space travel, mobile telephones, the internet and even heart transplants were then yet to be achieved. The question underlying this report is whether the government can encourage millions of individuals and families, be they in rented flats or homes of their own, to rise to the challenge. But it is indeed unimaginable to say that we cannot make substantial change. So, you know, the next 42 years are going to be incredibly exciting. Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir men's blood. Make big plans, aim high in hope and work. Search all the parks in all your cities, you'll find no statues of committees. That's especially for local authority officers. And my penultimate slide is a Lyndon B. Johnson quote. If future generations are to remember us more with gratitude than contempt, we must leave them more than the miracles of technology. We must leave them a glimpse of the world as it was in the beginning, not just after we got through with it. And as always, I will leave you with Dick Dastardly. Don't just stand there. Please do something. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Richard, for an excellent presentation, as always.